I'd like to begin. Javier Becerra, Attorney General for the state of California. I'm going to begin by introducing first the folks who will speak today, and I want to make sure I recognize my team who worked on these matters. And so I'm going to go a little longer than I typically would in any press conference because I want to get into the heart of what we want to discuss. After I speak, I'm going to invite the chief of the Sacramento Police Department, Daniel Hahn, to say some words. After he speaks, we will then invite our mayor of Sacramento, Darrell Steinberg, to say some remarks. And then after he speaks, we'd like to invite Pastor Sadler from the Shiloh Baptist Church to say some words. So Pastor Anthony Sadler will speak at the end. At that conclusion of his remarks, we will take questions from the press. And I'd ask the press to, if you have questions that are unrelated to today's subject, that you refrain until we answer any and all questions that might be posed regarding this subject. Okay? Let me introduce some of my team. Not all are here. I'm going to run down some names because there are a few of them. Sue Slager, who is the Supervising Deputy Attorney General, who is here. Ronald Lee, Deputy Attorney General. Cherokee Melton, Deputy Attorney General. Randy Chance, the Director of our Research Bureau within the Criminal Justice Information Services. Janie Scott, who is a research program specialist. Lillian Marr, who is a legal analyst. John Marsh, who is the Assistant Chief of the Division of Law Enforcement, is here. Chief Kevin Gardner is here as well, although he was recused from this particular activity because he's a former member of the Sacramento Police Department as well. And I want to acknowledge Kelly Evans, who served as the Special Assistant for Criminal Justice Issues in the department before Governor Newsom stole her from us and now has her with him. I also want to acknowledge the team that, quite honestly, made it possible for us to get here. Ron Davis, who is here, who is a partner with 21st Century Policing and is perhaps the most or one of the most experienced technicians as a former law enforcement individual, someone who has worked in government, federal and otherwise, a real expert on this that we really leaned on for a great deal of information and advice. Stephen Raphael, who's a professor at UC Berkeley at the Goldman School of Public Policy, who provided immense support when it came to data and research on this subject matter. On March 27th, 2018, following the March 18th policing incident which resulted in the fatal shooting of Stephon Clark by members of the Sacramento Police Department, I announced that the California Department of Justice would undertake independent oversight of the Sacramento Police Department's investigation of the shooting. I took this step at the request of the Chief of Police of Sacramento, Daniel Hahn. Concurrent with that decision, Chief Hahn and I agreed that the Department of Justice would also conduct an independent assessment of the Sacramento Police Department's use of force-related policies, training, and practices. The purpose of this review was to help identify best practices to achieve the safest outcomes for community members and officers alike. We are here today to announce the first set of results of this independent assessment. Our purpose today is not to discuss the criminal investigation of the shooting of Stephon Clark. That investigation is entirely separate and ongoing, and as such, not appropriate for discussion at this time. You may have also noticed that I said we are announcing the first set of results of our assessment. Today's report addresses six specific areas: use of force priorities, use of force reporting and investigation, use of force training, past officer-involved shooting incidents, personnel complaint procedures, community engagement, and transparency. Our assessment of SPD, Sacramento Police Department's use of force-related policies and systems, will continue beyond today's report. The second and final phase of our assessment of the SPD, which is already underway, will cover the following areas: a sample of non-deadly use of force incidents, a sample of misconduct complaints, the discipline system, prevention of bias, recruitment and hiring, data management. We will report the results of these additional assessments once our work is completed. The Sacramento Police Department is not alone among communities trying to identify how to best ensure that policing is safe, effective, and constitutional. But Sacramento's leaders should be recognized for reaching out and voluntarily requesting assistance in this critical matter. Chief Hahn, you invited me and the Department of Justice to come in. You invited outside scrutiny of your operations. That is a hallmark of strong leadership. It sends an important signal about you and your department's commitment to continued progress. Beginning in April 2018, my team engaged in countless interviews, site visits, ride-alongs. We toured training facilities, observed training programs, and reviewed thousands of pages of documents. This process enabled my team to better understand both SPD policy, in other words, the rules that govern conduct, and SPD practices, how those rules are or are not reflected in action. We were able to observe how SPD systems are currently functioning, both in terms of positive practices and areas for improvement. I thank the men and women of SPD, from the rank and file all the way to the top, for their exceptional openness and cooperation. Equally important, we sought out the voices and perspectives of the community. We met with stakeholders from different neighborhoods and sectors of the diverse Sacramento community, including community-based organizations, residents, and advocates. We thank these civic leaders for their heartfelt candor and for sharing their experiences and insights with us. In conducting this assessment, our DOJ team was assisted by nationally recognized law enforcement leaders and experts with deep experience in the issues evaluated. I mentioned their names. It goes without saying that we could not have produced this thorough of an assessment without their partnership. Each section of our report highlights areas where SPD excels and or otherwise engages in promising practices. We then identify areas for improvement in each of these areas assessed. Finally, we offer recommendations grounded in evidence and promising practices from around the country to help guide the reform efforts which SPD has independently committed to pursue. Some of the key findings, and I won't go through them all, but some of the key findings, because they were a number. Overall, our DOJ team found SPD personnel to be professional, thoughtful, and committed to change. Throughout the process, personnel at all levels of the police department have been receptive to evaluation and improvement. At the outset of our review, we discovered that SPD's command and supervisory staff had already begun thinking strategically about how to improve systems internally and build external relationships. And SPD has taken significant steps in this direction already. The department recently implemented a foot pursuit policy. It strengthened its body-worn camera policy. It engaged in enhanced transparency efforts, such as the timely public release of use of force statistics and audio and video recordings in officer-involved shootings and other critical incidents. At the same time, we also observed that the SPD had room for improvement in some of the operational systems that we assessed. We identified room for improvement in outdated use of force policies. We found a lack of standardization and rigor in use of force internal investigations and training. And we found a lack of suitable measures to handle systemic information collection and accountability, particularly with regard to the personnel complaint process. In all, our report issued a series of recommendations, 49 in all, intended to assist SPD in managing use of force and in protecting community members and officers. Let me highlight just a few of the recommendations. For one, SPD could put policies and procedures in place to make sure that use of force incidents are reviewed and investigated appropriately by the agency. SPD could also modify their use of force training to place greater emphasis on teaching officers to have a guardian mindset, meaning that officers emphasize communication over commands and cooperation over compliance. SPD could also build a system to track intake and internal review of complaints by the public about the conduct of their personnel to ensure that they are properly investigated. Overall, I think it's important to first begin by saying that losing a loved one under any circumstances leads to pain and soul searching. The officer-involved shooting of Stephon Clark has become an indelible event here in California, not only for the Clark family and the involved officers, but for the entire community of Greater Sacramento. The Sacramento Police Department's willingness to analyze not only this incident, but also its own force-related policies and systems in an effort to attain safer outcomes in the future is most encouraging, as is the community's willingness to participate in this entire process. This partnership can help create a police culture that demonstrates that effective policing and respectful policing go hand in hand. Throughout this review, we observed reasonableness and good faith exhibited by all stakeholders, including community members, union officials, police personnel, and city leadership. That's what we want to encourage. That's what I'd like to encourage these stakeholders to continue working together. The Sacramento Police Department, our city leaders, our civic leaders, our residents working together to move forward. I want to thank those who were involved in helping us conduct this assessment. I'd now like to invite Chief Daniel Hahn to say some remarks.
Thank you. I'd first like to thank Attorney General Xavier Becerra and his staff for agreeing to take on the responsibility of thoroughly examining our use of force-related policies, training, and practices to help identify possible ways to achieve a safer outcomes for our community members and our officers alike. The Sacramento Police Department is not interested in being good enough or narrowly complying with the laws and policies governing our work. We continue to seek ways to be a leader in law enforcement and to set an example of transparency, community involvement, and constant improvement. That's why we invited the Attorney General to examine our department from top to bottom, to help us find ways to improve, even in ways no other agencies are doing today. Attorney General Becerra delivered on that request, and we are grateful to say that we have a robust list of recommendations we are taking to heart. We are going to keep our promise to examine every one of them with an open mind and an open organization. Today, we will provide a public list of each recommendation and our preliminary response to each one of them. Today's list of recommendations is only the first phase of what we know will be an ongoing cooperation with the Attorney General's office. Next, we understand, as the Attorney General mentioned earlier, his office will be looking into the use of force beyond officer-involved shootings and issues such as recruitment, hiring, and prevention of bias. We welcome this partnership and intend to uphold our end of it. After our initial review, there are numerous recommendations we believe we are substantially fulfilling today or where we have made significant progress towards implementing. Of course, we know there is always room to improve, and we will focus on improving even those areas where we already comply with the Attorney General's recommendations. The fact that no one has done it before, or it's not real common in law enforcement, will never prevent us from researching ways to continue to improve our department. In some cases, these recommendations reflect issues that face significant legal or legislative hurdles, but that law enforcement agencies statewide seek to explore further. Because we strive to be a department whose actions, at all times, reflect the best practices of our profession, we have begun moving toward the aspirations the Attorney General has for all of law enforcement in these areas. There are recommendations the Attorney General's staff has described as aspirational, things that a few, if any, departments are doing, but that a leader in law enforcement should strive to achieve. We recently created a research, development, and training division to do just that. As we strive to be aspirational, we know we can't do this without moving forward together as one community. Today, I'm pleased to have community leaders joining us who have been instrumental in helping us improve as a police department. Pastor Sadler, who you'll hear in a minute, from Shiloh Baptist Church, who speaks at our academy to our academy recruits and helped us create programs such as Walk in My Shoes, Day of Service, and developed a program for our recent academy graduates to join in the weekly Oak Park Peace Walk. Ramona Landeros, the president of the Benito Juarez Association, who has helped strengthen our relationship with the Spanish-speaking community through things such as Spanish-speaking town halls, and served on promotional panels within our department, and serves on our Use of Force Training Review Committee. Merv Brookins and Pastor P from Brother to Brother, who continually work with officers through their Junior Pacers program and help coordinate the Del Paso Heights Day of Service, and were recognized as our 2018 Business Partner of the Year. We are grateful and eagerly accept the challenge of leading the discussion and the path forward on these issues. And we look forward to partnering with the Attorney General's office to make them a reality in our community. We are very grateful to the Attorney General for his partnership to achieve excellence. When we said we wanted a thorough, unrestricted examination of our department, we meant it. And when Attorney General Becerra promised to deliver it, he meant it. Now, the work before us, both agencies, begins in earnest. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Gerald Steinberg.
Thank you very much, Mr. Attorney General and Police Chief Hahn and all the leaders who are gathered here today. This is actually a remarkable document and does not happen every day. I want to begin by thanking the Attorney General, of course, for accepting Chief Hahn's invitation to examine how we police our community and recommend ways we can do better. The police chief asked him to give a thorough, unsparing examination, and he delivered exactly that. His report, as I have reviewed it, found that our policies are legally solid, praised our department, as you heard, for its professionalism, but also expressed specific ways that we can improve to not just live by the letter of the law, but actually to live up to the spirit, how best to protect our public safety officers and the community, and to reduce the potential of people being hurt or killed on either and both sides. What Attorney General Becerra has delivered is not a list of things we need to do to have a professional, effective police department. We are already that. It is instead a list that is intended for us to elevate, to ensure that our policies and our practices make us the leader in law enforcement. These recommendations, by the way, as I understand it, include things that many cities are not doing, and that many cities would tell you cannot be done. But that's not what the city of Sacramento is. We're not going to try to huddle in the middle of the pack. We are ready to lead the way to an era of policing where transparency, where fairness and community partnership are central to everything we do. Chief Hahn, as the Attorney General said a moment ago, deliberately sought this review, as a way to help get the Sacramento Police Department to achieve the standards of excellence in 21st century policing. He has earned my gratitude and deserves our community's gratitude for leaning in, not walking away or being defensive, which would be, I suppose, an easy thing to do. Acknowledging and admitting where we must improve our policies is a strength. It is not a weakness. Recognize that the Justice Department here praised the progress we have made in the past year. Every one of our officers, which is not true, again, in most cities, is equipped with a body camera. And our expectations for how they are used are being written into policy. Where there have been errors and problems and mistakes, they're being corrected. Our ordinance requiring a release of video footage has been adopted by the state legislature. And our city's practice of releasing video quickly far exceeds the new state law. Mr. Attorney General, you and your agency and your great team, because I know you have a great team, have done our police department, our city, and our community a major service here by helping to push the change that Chief Hahn and the City Council started. I would point out for myself that in my second week on the job, 2 years ago, I put forward the funding for $750,000 for de-escalation training, and it's now becoming the standard in our city and beyond. I'm very confident that Chief Hahn and the police department will embrace the findings of this examination and put them into action to ensure that we are a city where police and community work in partnership and where we lead the way to fairness and transparency. One other brief comment. I also believe that this very important independent review, and this is just my opinion, speaks to the policy direction I hope the state legislature will continue to try and take. Because just as the chief voluntarily asked the Attorney General to review our most high-profile officer-involved shooting in 2018, just as the Attorney General is providing this essential and helpful policy review, to the degree that the AG is able through the legislative process, and he, by the way, he is very able, to add more resources, the more independent the reviews in other incidents, the more faith people will have in whatever is the outcome. Finally, I look forward to working with the chief to bring these recommendations out into the community, as he has already begun, and we have already begun extensive community outreach to ensure that our neighborhoods are an integral part of these changes, to push each other to strive and to keep all people safe. And finally, I loved how the AG ended his comments, to acknowledge that all this is about human beings. We ask the men and women who wear the uniform to perform tasks that require them to put their lives on the line every day. And where the men and women of law and too many times men and women in uniform have lost their lives. We experienced that in our community just a couple of weeks ago in Davis, in neighboring Davis. 22-year-old young woman. And so we have the deepest sorrow, and I am sorry as the city's mayor when any officer is hurt or their life is affected in any way. And at the same time, I am sorry for the families of young men and young women, no matter the circumstances, who lose their lives in officer-involved shootings. We need to say that. It's the worst kind of a tragedy, and we have a lot of self-examination and exploration around the issues still to come from the Attorney General's review, including the issue of implied bias. And so this is so important. It is life and death. And you've rendered us a great service, Mr. Attorney General. And Mr. Police Chief, you've shown tremendous leadership by leaning in. Thank you very much.
Pastor Anthony Sadler, Shiloh Baptist Church.
Thank you, Attorney General Becerra, to Mayor Steinberg, to our Chief Daniel Hahn, to the partners on the stage with us, and to the community at large. I always like to start conversations like this acknowledging the sanctity of life. And no one on this stage is under the illusion that anything that has been said or even done today will take away and eliminate the pain and the loss for the Clark family. But with that, and out of such tragedy, there are lessons to be learned where we can continue to grow as a community and as a city and do better. I have not had a chance to review the report. I'm receiving it just as you are. But as one community voice amongst many, we are excited about the opportunity that it presents. For Chief Hahn to have opened up the department to this review by the AG office and to be transparent as he has been, we believe that this document is not to fix all, but it is one step in the resolution of a complicated issue of the use of force with members of the community that our department is sworn to serve. With that, I believe the direction is right. When I hear the AG speaking of emphasis such as communication and cooperation, that excites me, that encourages me. That's a direction and an approach that we want our officers to take with the community, and I believe we want the community, it's the same direction the community wants to be seen from the officers. We have to get rid of the them and us mentality and start thinking holistically that we are one city, we are one community, together we build. That's going to be an emphasis that you're going to hear in the coming days, weeks, and even months ahead. Together we build, because certainly it is together that we're going to build the type of relationship, law enforcement with the Sacramento community that the community would like to see and that keeps our officers safe at the same time. And if this one step and this one review puts us a little closer to assuring that no one loses their life tragically to gun violence, then it would have all been worth it. I can't say enough about the integrity of Chief Hahn and his willingness to open up the department in the way that he has. I have been one that have taken internal reviews, and they keep you up at night, and they cause you moments of pause. But even in that uncomfortable inspection, if it leads to change that is worth our Sacramento community embracing, then it's all worth it, because together we build. So my last portion would be to the community at large. Play a part. It's easy to Monday night quarterback. It's easy to sit back and watch the news clips from the media and to come up with your own conclusions and keep your own biases. We're living in a nation that is continually divided by leaders and segments of our communities. I would like Sacramento to be different. I know you would like Sacramento to be different. We are a community like no other, not only in our ethnic diversity, but I believe also in our heart for the city. And I believe that opportunities like this, however tragic they may be, present an opportunity for growth, for Sacramento to come together and maybe even show the rest of the nation what a city working together can look like. So we're under no illusion that this is the fix-all, but I think we need to celebrate the steps that we take, and this is one worth celebrating. And I would encourage the community, get involved at whatever level you choose to get involved, whatever your strengths are, get involved and make Sacramento the city we all hope it'll be. Thank you.
Pastor Sadler, thank you very much for those words. Just want to I stress one thing. It's a pretty thorough report, but it's not very thick. It's readable. Maybe it won't be kind of reading you do in bed all the time, but I hope people will take a look. It's a testament and it's a roadmap. And Sacramento could be in the lead as we go down that path. And so I hope the work that's been done by so many people will be acknowledged by having folks read this. And then we can judge whether or not the Sacramento Police Department and our community is making progress in moving forward. You got to start on that road to go from difficult times to a point of respect, and then ultimately, we hope, a point of trust. And it's a pretty good roadmap on how to get to that road all the way to get to confidence and trust. We'll take any questions you might have.
General, you said that the Stephen Clark case was a separate criminal investigation, but was the facts of that case used in creating this review?
The facts in the Stephen Clark case did not form a part of the assessment for this report because that investigation was ongoing and we didn't have all the facts in front of us. At the same time, our team that reviewed the department's policies and practices has a firewall between it and our team that's doing the criminal investigation. So that did not constitute part of this. We did examine, I believe it was 18 different officer-involved shootings in coming up with some of these recommendations. Yes?
Are there recommendations in this report that you think should be codified in legislation so that police departments throughout California would have them as part of their policies? For example, you talk about better defining and explaining the requirement that force be used only when necessary, proportionality, the sanctity of human life. Is that something that every police department in California should do?
Yeah, I want to say a straight out yes, but I think what's important is to recognize you got to be able to go down that path. And just saying you're going to do it by statute doesn't mean it gets done in practice. And remember, for all the folks who are in that uniform, it takes resources, it takes training to actually implement what you put down on paper. And so what I think you're seeing in California more than any other place in the country is our people, our communities, and our police departments moving in that direction, whether or not there are statutes in place. But certainly to the degree that something is as important to a community that we want to make sure it gets done, the more it's hard and fast in statute or ordinance, the better off you are. This is clearly a roadmap, as I said, to get there. Some of these ideas have become law in some jurisdictions, and I suspect some will become law in the future.
The same question to
Sure.
Chief Hahn. Are there recommendations here that you think should be taken statewide to every police department in the state?
Well, that's not my role to make statewide law. I think there's probably some recommendations in here that people are going to try to make state law. So if that's what happens, then that's what happens. But we're interested in our department and looking at these recommendations and implementing in our department.
We'll go here. If they'll go here, then go there. Go ahead.
Does this report look at the effectiveness of the oversight process, the OPSA, whether or not it's strong enough, and if not, why not?
But by the time we finish the entire assessment, and this is the first set of recommendations, we will have taken a look at Sacramento Police Department, essentially from the bottom floor up on these issues involving police use of force and the issues that are in front of mind of most people. So my suspicion is that almost any question that folks will ask in terms of how police officers engage the community will have been addressed in this report and the subsequent report. Well, again, we're not going to prejudge, and I'll let the mayor see if he wants to answer, but we're not going to prejudge. We're going to go out and do the assessments and let the facts and all the information we gather speak for itself. But Mayor?
So this is largely, I'm not speaking for the Attorney General, never been Attorney General, but as a former state legislative leader, one of the constraints that the Attorney General has in these instances is resources. If you look at the number of officer-involved shootings throughout the state, and if you were going to say, well, they should all be independently reviewed, that is a huge resource question for the legislature. I do believe, and I said it, I alluded to it in my statement, that the more cases and the more policies that can be reviewed independently, and I consider the Attorney General to be independent from the local government structure, the better. And maybe it's not all, but it ought to be more. And I think this particular instance is a great example of where the outcome, whatever it is, either policy-wise or individual case-wise, will be seen differently if there is that layer of independent review. And that's what we're in the midst of here, and I'm glad for it. It's nothing negative about a DA. That's local, but that's local. I want that independent review as many times as possible. I think that's good, sound policy.
So I'll speak generally to those two questions, and I think it's going to come out not just in this report, I suspect in our subsequent report, and I suspect in other examinations of other departments, not just police departments, but other agencies, that training is always an underutilized asset. And here, I don't think there's any doubt, especially with the changing nature of policing in our country and on our streets. And so there's no question that there has to be ongoing training for our officers. I go back to what Mayor Steinberg just said. Talk to Chief Hahn about how much money he has to do training. And I suspect a lot of this has to do with trying to shepherd your resources as best you can. On the question of the actual incidents involving a shooting, police officer shooting that we examined, we're not going to go into a particular incident and try to resurrect it and Monday morning quarterback it. We use the information from those incidents to help inform our assessment and to try to help explain some of our recommendations. Yeah, let me go to... we will do a follow-up report on some of the other areas that we're examining. And we'll always be available to work with Chief Hahn to try to provide more specificity for those who wish to delve more deeper into it. Yes?
You mentioned that you looked at policies around the country. Can you cite some examples of some policies from other agencies that you think be applied specifically to the Sacramento Police Department?
Yeah, there are a number of law enforcement agencies that have undertaken a number of very promising reforms. I know Washington, D.C. is moving in this direction. A number of localities have had no choice but to move in some of these directions as a result of investigations that have been done of their practices. And so there are a number of localities. I won't get into the specifics of all of them because I didn't get into the actual examination. And my team could answer some of those questions more specifically if you'd like later on to give you some of those cities that are doing some of these best practices already that we're talking to Sacramento's Police Department about. Yes and yes.
Are you going to be looking at the Stephon Clark case when you put together the rest of the assessment?
We will look at use the information from the Stephon Clark case if and when during the assessment that investigation has been completed. But we will not try to use the information, the facts from the Clark case before that criminal investigation has been completed. Yes. Sí, briefly in Spanish. Hoy estamos anunciando que hemos terminado una examinación del Departamento de Policía de Sacramento en cuanto a los esfuerzos del departamento de tratar de hacer todo lo posible para estar seguro de que el esfuerzo que hace la policía aquí en Sacramento es no solo legal, pero en el interés no solo de el pueblo que protege la policía, pero protege también a los policías que tienen que cada día ponerse frente del peligro. Y en este reporte que hemos terminado, que le dimos al jefe de policía, Daniel Hahn, le damos las recomendaciones para poder avanzar aquí en Sacramento, para tener no solo una agencia policíaca que hace todo su trabajo legalmente, pero que avanza los intereses de toda una comunidad, especialmente las comunidades que no tienen tanta fe en la policía, para darle a todos la seguridad que todos queremos. Los puntos más específicos son que aquí en Sacramento la policía, al fin del día, son muy profesionales y hacen un trabajo usando las técnicas y las prácticas ya conocidas como buenas prácticas en muchos casos. Encontramos también casos donde pueden mejorar y ponemos en detalle las áreas donde puede mejorar el departamento y dejamos bastantes recomendaciones, 79 recomendaciones para poder avanzar. So we had a question here, then I think here. Oh, it's here.
The review brings up the subject of proportionality as it used to be among process incidents. Does that put in the that for reasonable officers to have to make this decision? Because it seems like in previous policies, if an officer's life is in danger, you shoot. Empty your gun if you have to protect them. But becoming more nuanced, having police officers making more nuanced decisions. Is that a tougher job for them? With it becoming more danger?
An officer's job in those situations is tough no matter what, and it's always been that way. But I think the subject of proportionality, the good thing about this report is it gives examples of other cities and other policies. And so we recently implemented a research and development division. And so my assumption is that in the months to come, we'll be flying to some of these departments or driving and taking a look at how they do the training, what their policies do. So I don't think there's ever a time we should stop looking at ways to get better. I don't suspect it will make an officer's job tougher or easier. It's a tough job already in those circumstances where you have to make a split-second decision. It's never going to change. It's always a tough decision.
I think you may well get some concern in the community that Mr. Hahn Clark did not inform this effort, and I'm just wondering what maybe a couple folks might say to those concerns.
So just 2 points on that. How do we include the information on the incident before we determine that it's factual? You can't base a report, especially one when it comes to policing, that's not based on real facts, because we need to know that the direction we send our police is one that backs up whatever they do. Secondly, if we were to try to include information on the Clark incident in this report at a time when we have a confidential criminal investigation underway, we would so undermine the ability to actually complete that investigation in an impartial and confidential way that allows us to elicit every bit of information, in fact, we need to make the right call, because that case is not that investigation is not a case of a civilian review. That's a case of potential criminal prosecution. And so you just got to be really careful. Yes, sir.
What is your plan once that investigation is complete? Will you release your report independently of the DA's review? Will you share it with her and go over it? How's it going to work?
So we're proceeding along with that criminal investigation, and again, we don't say too much about it other than when we're ready, we will report it publicly. How, when, where? Stay tuned. This has been an independent investigation from the start, and it will be until the end. And so, as I said, the how, where, when, and so forth of how we move forward is something that we'll report when we're ready.
So it's conceivable the two officers could come to different conclusions.
You're asking me to speculate on a criminal investigation. I'm not going to do that. As I said, we were reviewing each of the incidents to glean information that it could help us when it came to the current policies and practices of the Sacramento Police Department. We were not opening up review of these cases to re-examine the incident. And so our view was of these incidents for the purpose of gleaning information that could inform our report and future actions by the Sacramento Police Department in conducting its policing duties. Yes and yes.
You have a community that's waited 10 months for this investigation to conclude. And
Civil or criminal?
criminal.
Okay.
And there's some anger in the community that it's taken so long. So why the timing of this report now, when the community would just rather see the results of the investigation?
So 2 points. This review, this assessment of the practices and the policies is on a totally separate track from the criminal investigation. As I said, there's a firewall within my office between the teams that are working on this. So there's no communication, there's no sharing of information. They each proceed on their own. And so the team in reviewing the department's policies and practices completed its review. The team reviewing all the information relating to the Stephon Clark incident is still moving forward. I will say this. Chief Hahn has finished his report. He has handed to us at the Department of Justice and to the District Attorney's Office his report. So at this stage, if there is no report that's publicly released, it's not because Chief Hahn and the Sacramento Police Department haven't done their job or that the mayor hasn't done his job. It's that my department is reviewing this. We're holding it because we're not done. And we're not going to issue anything or say anything until we're done. Because, as I said, this is now a criminal investigation, and we don't have any right to play with the lives of people. We got to get it right. And so that will finish when my team says we're finished. But I do recognize that people want to know, and they want answers. And so we're working as diligently as we can. And I believe we're not too far from the horizon when we get that done. Yes, and actually yes and yes. Let me go over here first. Folks, you hadn't asked the question. Yeah, no one except my team had read this report before today, and unless you're speed readers, you haven't read it either. That includes the mayor. That includes the chief. We did not share this final report with anyone because we said we were going to do this independently. On the criminal side, it's even more intense, the necessity to maintain these firewalls. If we had more resources and more personnel, maybe it'd go faster. We're just going to do it right. I'd rather do it right than rushed. And so we're going to get there. I fully understand. There's still grief out there, and there's still consternation. That's the even more reason why we got to get it right. And so I think that's important to recognize. Let me see if Chief and Mayor want to say something as well.
Yeah, something I think Pastor Sadler wants to say a few words on that one too. So one, there's a lot of different people involved in the complete review of the incident, the DA's office, the Attorney General's, and so they're all, as the Attorney General said, on their own track. And then this review is totally separate from the criminal investigation. So people, when they're done, they announce this. So like we had nothing to do with what today was. They finished their review and they released it today. In regards to the meetings with community leaders, I would be remiss as the police chief and us as a department if we didn't do everything we can to ensure that people, if there are protests, that they are able to do those protests and protect their rights, at the same time preventing violence in our city. That's my job. You know, I will do whatever it takes to ensure that people are safe in our community. So if that means meeting with community leaders, which it typically does, that's what we'll do.
I'd just like to add to that, if I may. You know, the chief and I have different jobs, but they're complementary jobs. And my job has always been, I see it very clearly, to do all I can as mayor of this city to, one, keep the peace, two, to seek justice, and three, to invest, and I mean really invest, especially in our lower income communities and especially young people. And that's what we've done from the very, very beginning. Now, the Stephon Clark shooting is, no doubt, it's intensified. It's intensified the obligation. It's intensified the moment. And so, yes, we're meeting with community leaders, but we've been meeting with community leaders for 2 years, long before this occurred. We've been building our neighborhood investment strategies long before. So we're aware of the moment, and we'll continue to stay focused on keeping peace, seeking justice, and doing everything we can to uplift all of the neighborhoods of the city.
And just kind of following that, the characterization that the community is more interested in the results of the criminal investigation and not the policy and procedural change report, I don't agree with that. From my community exposure, I believe that the community certainly is waiting anxiously to hear and looking for some accountability or some resolution to the tragic Stephon Clark shooting, but they are equally concerned, in my opinion, as to what systemic changes need to take place to prevent such a thing from happening again. So even though the report may not specifically entail or involve the Stephon Clark shooting, it does in general, because he is one that was lost his life tragically due to an officer-involved shooting, and that's what this review is about, the use of force. As far as the drip of information, and is there preparation, is there some sort of design plan in mind? I don't think there's any manipulation or anything like that going on. I think it's just a realistic look at the facts. The DA is going to release her report, and it's either going to find that charges will be filed or that charges will not be filed. I agree with the chief. I think we would be remiss if we did not at least start having some dialogue and some preparation on the just in case, and none of us up here know what that report will read, but on the just in case it does come in with a result that, or a finding that some of our community members would find difficult, we would be prepared to how to handle that in a way to where it doesn't escalate, and that people can demonstrate without it moving to violence. So it's just in preparation.
I understand no one knows what the final report will be, but there are some people on the dais who do know what was submitted and what is being considered. And so the idea, even though that this is, happening in independent portions, for example, generally you do have what the Sacramento Police Department submitted. You do know what their findings are, so it's not completely in a vacuum here. And so for people to understand that these are happening totally separately, we do know that some parties do have a general understanding of the facts and what happened in this case, and perhaps for the DA it's an issue of the law and what, whatever metrics they're using to decide whether or not charges will be brought. But the understanding in the community is people know what's going on here, and they just want to essentially have that report.
But I think that underlines the importance of the accountability and the check and balance that is existing in this, right? That the AG's review was independent of the SAC PD, that SAC PD's investigation was independent of the AG's, and that the final decision concerning criminal charges is yet another independent entity with District Attorney Anne Marie. I think that's just the importance of our system. However flawed our criminal system may be, and however there is an opportunity for change and for reformation, and I believe in that. I believe that there are institutions in place and accountability in place that the decision rests, rightfully so, in the District Attorney's office. That's
Take maybe one or two quick questions, because otherwise we'll move on.
Oh, just maybe a question for the mayor, but recognizing there's not a date certain on when the district attorney will release her report, but what is your latest ETA?
I'm not prepared to say. I understand that it's going to be relatively sooner than later. I mean, I think sometime in the first months of this year, but that's it. The Attorney General and the DA have to complete their review, period. And so, but he said it today, the General said it today, that it's, how did you put it, near the horizon or close to the horizon? So we know it's coming.
All the way in the back, and then here and here, and then that'll close it.
Do you agree with all the recommendations, and are you prepared to execute all of them?
Well, I think we are doing several of them, or at least working on several of them. And the other ones, like I said earlier, fortunately, we created a new division that is what all they do is research and development. So we will take the recommendations. I know there was a Washington, D.C. reference. I know one of them refers to something that a department in D.C. is doing. So my guess is our research folks will fly out to D.C. and see exactly how they implement it, what training they have, their policies, and then we'll determine whether it works here. So like I said earlier, the good thing about this report, it gives us examples of what they're utilizing for those recommendations and the departments that are doing them to give us a starting point to go out and meet with those folks. So
Here and here, and we'll close.
Just to clarify, you said the results of your criminal investigation will be released when it's done. Do you see any scenario where, will you wait for the DA's report and release subsequent to that, or do you see any scenario where you might release your report or your findings prior to the district attorney?
My team and I will discuss the progress. We'll try to figure out where we are. I mean, it's been independent of the district attorney from the start. When we get to that point where we are ready, we think we're pretty close to being ready, we'll probably start to figure out how, like this release, how we can make sure that we communicate this best to the public. How that rolls out, I couldn't tell you right now because I don't know what my team is going to tell me. But I can say that we are getting closer to seeing that point in the horizon. Yes.
If the city adopts all the recommendations in this report, is it going to ensure there's not another step on the bar?
You're asking me that?
Yeah.
I think he's asking you.
well, I don't think there's anything that's 100%. In any walk of life, not just law enforcement, but in the unpredictable world of law enforcement, I don't think anybody could rightfully tell you that anything is 100%. What we want to be is the best we possibly can be and do the best we possibly can for our community and the people we interact with and the officers that are on the street. So,
If I could just say, everything in this report, the recommendations, they speak to best practices, promising practices. They don't say 100% foolproof practices. It's human nature we're dealing with. So the more we close the doors to mistake or misunderstanding, the chances are the more people we're going to see walking around the streets alive. And so it's just a process of making sure we do everything we can. And one last point before we close, because I think it's the point about the public wanting to know. One of the most important things we can do is lend credibility to this process. So then people hopefully will have confidence in the result, regardless of the result, and all stakeholders who may have different positions in this. If the chief and the department had not already begun to implement some of these reforms, had begun to do these things in the community, I suspect standing here today, a whole bunch of the questions to the chief would have been, hey, it's been almost a year and your department has not changed one bit. That would have been the criticism. So the chief engages and the department engages in a lot of these reforms that are good reforms that we all agree are things that we want to see. And the issue is, hey, are you trying to prepare for some other news, maybe bad news, by doing a little bit here, a little bit there, letting it trickle out? There's never a win. But there is a need for each of us who has a job to do it right. And I would simply say that what you're seeing is those people in good faith honorable intentions, trying to do what they think is right. And what we can hopefully do is give the public a sense of credibility so that when things do come out, whether it's our second report or whether it's the criminal investigation report, people will judge it on its merits, not because of whatever's swirling. I think if we can do that, we're on that road to respect and ultimately trust. And so I want to thank each and every one of the individuals who came today. I want to thank the team, my DOJ team, our just phenomenal experts who made it possible for us to issue this report. And I want to thank the media who helped cover this. But at the end of the day, what we want to do is thank the people who are relying on law enforcement, state and local law enforcement, to do it the right way. And I hope that this is one step on that path to make sure we're doing it the right way. So thank you all very much.